So I've had to order a few parts for the cart here, specifically a handful of small bearings. And while I wait for those, I thought I'd do a quick video I've gotten quite a few requests for. Drill bit sharpening. That, and today is International Drill Sharpening Day, so you know, it feels appropriate. The cart is more or less how we left off in part 1, though I did make a little bit of progress on the control system. But I need to get enough footage together to make an interesting second part. Think of drill sharpening like treading water. Now I know there are a lot of great videos out there on this topic already. Nonetheless, you asked, I oblige. This will be drill bit sharpening by hand, but with a twist. Sorry. Let's do what we did in the high-speed steel lathe tool sharpening video. We'll start from scratch, make our own drill bit, and see why, when, where, how, and who we need to grind, which effectively is how you sharpen them when they're dull. I mean, there's a little more work in making your own drill bit from scratch, of course, but once we get to sharpening it, it'll be how you sharpen them when they're dull. In our case, we'll be starting from extremely dull. So on the right, you're looking at a dull drill bit. My trick for sharpening something I've never sharpened before, something I don't know how to sharpen, is to just simply look at a new sharp thing and copy what you see onto the dull thing. Grind your dull one until it matches. Now, mind you, all drills aren't created equal. You can get some real winners right out of the box with dull or even backwards grinds. As with anything else, you get what you pay for. Make sure you're copying something good. Now, the problem with copying geometry from a sharp tool onto a dull tool, although you'll likely get your dull tool sharp, it doesn't necessarily tell you why they're sharpened the way they are. And if, for example, you needed to make changes, in the case of drill bit, say for a different material, or if you wanted to drill an oversized or an undersized hole, well, you wouldn't have much insight into how to do that. You probably won't have that insight after watching this video either, but we'll try. I'm going to do this with a piece of round stock, some cold rolled steel in this case. This is just a cutoff from a piece of the drive shaft I'm using for the go-kart. Let's not get into why we're starting off with round stock and not say square stock, but if you think you know, leave a comment down below. Now, cold rolled steel does not make for a good drill bit. It's too soft. But for the amount of grinding I'll need to do to actually make this into something that drills, well, it's easier to show you with this stuff than it would be with a solid round piece of high-speed steel. This is just for demonstration. Though it should be hard enough to drill a clean hole in, say, some wood, or maybe we even try some aluminum. In the lathe tool sharpening video, before we did anything, we tried to take a cut with just the blank. I'm not going to do that. Hopefully it's self-evident that just a round piece of steel won't do anything at all other than maybe burn itself up. If it's not self-evident, you might want to stick to just buying new drills when your old ones get dull. To state the obvious, this has no cutting edges. The first thing I'm going to do is put 2 cutting edges on this thing since we're making a 2-flute drill. Your classic twist or jobber drill. Let's go take a look at this back at the bench. Since we'd like this to drill a hole while it spins, and the round face is what's touching our work, you might expect a cutting lip to live somewhere across that face, somewhere near the center line. Now, in order to leave a sharp edge, we'll have to cut away some material. Removing that material also results in our first flute. Basically an empty spot where the material we're cutting can go out and exit the work. What you're looking at on the screen would be the start of a single flute drill. Drills with only one flute do exist, and they're really quite interesting. But they have a different geometry altogether, so we'll skip those and jump right to the classic 2-fluter you probably have at home. Or if you're anything like me, you might have one in your pocket right now. Okay, so anyway, 2 flutes, we'll need 2 grinds. If we make those 2 grinds so they meet in the center, well, you'd essentially cut your drill in half lengthwise, and it would fall apart in 2 pieces. We'll need to separate those grinds a bit, and doing so leaves behind a bit of material called the web. We'll get to that later, but the web is what gives the drill its strength. The larger or thicker that web is, the more torque it can take. The downside, of course, is that we have no cutting edges in the middle. That's problematic. While the flutes are trying to cut, the center is just sort of spinning there, getting all hot and bothered, making it hard to push the drill into the work. Now, I don't remember exactly, but I think the web thickness is usually somewhere around 15 or 20% of the drill diameter. Actually, let me check my 3/4 inch drill. This looks to be a smidge over 100 thou. It looks like it's 110. I've got the stock in a square collet block just so it's easier to flip 180 degrees. I think I'm going to go with 150 thou web thickness just because I think it'd be easier to see a little bit later in the video. I'll mill these 2 flutes in and then we'll take a look. Okay, so now we have 2 flutes on that front face. Ideally, this would have been done with a big ball or bullnose end mill, just so the inside corners wouldn't be sharp stress risers. But let's take a closer look at the flutes and the cutting edges we just made. If you recall from the lathe tool video, if the angle that the tool and the material make is 90 degrees, it has 0 rake. Basically, it's not very sharp yet. The way I milled this resulted in a 90-degree edge. It's a very strong edge, but not very useful for what we needed to do. I'm going to recut these flutes, but this time I'm going to use a 30-degree angle block just to tip the bit up and give some more of an acute angle to the cutting edge. I'm going to try not to lose that sharp corner we established with the first cut, just because it's sort of at the right location. Alright, well, I managed to blow a hole through the part, but now we have some backward lean to that face. We have some positive rake. Our cutting edge is one step closer to being useful. I wonder if this is how they make through-hole coolant drills. I'm a little bummed out about having broken through. I've never tried this before. I hope it still works. Anyway, allow me a quick analogy, would you? Imagine these 2 chisels are the 2 cutting edges of our 2-flute drill bit. They'd be arranged something like this, perhaps. Technically, I suppose, at an angle, like the tip of a drill bit. And they'd be spinning around, trying to drill a hole. Now, I think we can all relate to the fact that chisels don't cut very well standing up like this. They might make great scrapers, but they wouldn't move a lot of material. You'd want to give them a little bit of lean, something like that. Now, as they come around, they actually have a shot at cutting material. And this lean is exactly what we just cut on the mill. So if I spun these up, say, in the drill press and tried to drill a hole, I'd probably get smacked across the face with a chisel handle. Now imagine we could somehow twist these chisels around each other, kind of like a giant Twizzler. We'd end up with like a spiral staircase-looking thing. One might say perhaps like a drill bit. The twist rate of that spiral, of that helix, would depend on how far back we leaned the chisels. Right? The steeper the chisels, the steeper the helix. Let's go back to the twist drills. Oh, and consequently, the primary and secondary bevels that you find on a chisel, that's what we'll be grinding in next. Will the parallels never end? Okay, so we were talking about how the positive rake was created when we leaned the twisted up chisels back a bit. Now take a closer look at these 2 drills. It's a little subtle in this case, but this is what I got. One has a steeper helix angle, usually called slower, and the other one has a shallower or faster helix angle. The one on the left has the faster helix angle. It's got sort of more twists in it. That means that one has more rake than the other. Now, the more positive the rake, the sharper the tool, but the weaker the edge. You could get me on the technicality here because these are really 2 different types of drills. But in general, that means the drill with the faster helix would be more suited to softer materials. In this case, that drill is very good in aluminum. And you'll find that drills made for drilling harder metals have a slower helix to give them a stronger cutting edge. Our 30-degree helix is a bit of a compromise. Not fast, not slow. It's your standard drill angle. Now, I can't cut a helix on my milling machine. And believe you me, not a day goes by I don't feel terrible about that. So this is all you're getting. But hopefully you can imagine that these cuts would continue all the way up to the back of the drill, creating the flutes. We on the same page now? Can I move on? Next, we'll need some relief on the face, behind the cutting edges. We may have a sharper edge, but there's still no clearance there for the edge to actually move into the work. The trailing part of this edge would just rub and make one heck of a racket, keeping our sharp cutting lip from biting in and removing material to create a hole. Before we do that, there is one thing we should take care of now that will save some time later. This drill has no point. As is, this drill would try to walk all over the place like it's taking a Sunday stroll. Different parts of the face of the drill would likely touch the work at different times and places as it's spinning, causing it to move off its mark. So let's cut a point in the end. And for now, I'm going to cut that point on in the lathe. We'll come back to drill point angle a little bit later, and to be honest, will be more important when we're sharpening drills at the grinder. But for now, I'm going to do it here. I'm going to pick an arbitrary point angle of, 118 degrees. Okay, I'm just messing with you. 118 degrees is the standard drill point angle for general purpose drills. For now, you're just going to have to take my word for it. Trust me, I'm an amateur. To get a 118 degree included angle, my compound is set to 59 degrees off the lathe axis. Wow, it's actually starting to look like a drill. As you can see, it's starting to look more like a drill. Now look closely and you'll notice that the cutting edge is still sort of square to the trailing edge. There's still no relief back there. This drill would rub just as much as it would have before. It'll just be better at doing it in one place instead of walking around. We'll cut that material away over at the grinder. This next step would probably make more sense at a belt grinder, like up against the flat platen, but I'm going to wager more people have bench grinders than belt grinders. If I didn't say it out loud, we'll be going through all of this again, but faster, when we sharpen a dull drill bit. With a dull drill, all the work we've done till now will already have been done for you by the drill manufacturer. All this futzing around we're doing now is hopefully to give you some insight on what will come later. Okay, so cutting edge relief. We have two cutting edges. And we saw back on the lathe that the material behind that edge is square to that cutting edge. It's not giving it any clearance to actually cut. So we're going to remove some of this material immediately behind that edge. On bench grinders, the tool rest is set at the grinding wheel center line. Since the wheel is round, anything we pushed up against the wheel will end up with a bit of an angle to it. So if you look at it this way, it's touching at the bottom, but there's a gap at the top, so it's going to end up cutting an angle in the front. It's a hollow ground technically, but it's small enough in this case that it might as well be flat. Now, I don't personally use the tool rest, and I recommend against you doing it, but feel free if it makes you more comfortable. You'll get a lot more feedback and control if you're holding the drill in your hands than if it's leaning up against a vibrating grinder. Now, I don't want to lose that nice angle we put on the end of this drill. I just want to relieve the back a bit. So there's two things to sort of keep track of while we're grinding. First, I want to keep the drill to that same 59 degree angle that's built into the tip. So as I'm grinding, I'm going to be paying attention to make sure that cutting edge is sort of parallel to the wheel. As part of that, I also want to make sure that that edge is level, meaning the rotation of the drill is sort of in line with the wheel. We have to keep track of both that angle and sort of the rotation while we're grinding. So with the body of the drill at 59 degrees in this case, and that flute sort of parallel with the ground, I'm going to start to remove some material until I get up to that edge. Check your progress while you're grinding, and just dunk it in some water when it starts to get too hot to hold. When you start to see the sparks break across the cutting edge, sort of consistently from one side to the other, you'd know you've reached that edge. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. There's a nice consistent grind all the way up to the cutting edge. I haven't broken that edge, so my angle should still be correct. We're so close to having a sharp drill bit, I can almost taste it. No, wait, sorry, that might be the grit from my grinder. Now, if you look closely, there's still a bit of material we didn't get by just relieving up to that cutting edge. Basically, this part back here, you might even still see some of the blue. This needs to be taken away. Again, if you just look at the geometry when you're holding it and you think of that cutting edge trying to move into the work, you'll notice that this should sort of continue down and away. And that's what we're going to grind now. And I'm going to try to grind it until it's about in line with the opposing flute. I'm going to take it up to about this line here. This is more or less just like the first grind, except in order to get to that material, you're going to have to climb up your wheel a little bit. And just grind and check your work as you're going. It'll be a combination of kind of adjusting the angle and rolling the drill until you get this material out up to that line. Alright, well I think that looks like about it. I went back on the heel probably a little further than I needed to. This cold rolled seal is soft, it's a little bit more grabby than your standard high-speed steel drill bit. That, I'm doing it on camera, performance anxiety. But we now have a sharp edge, the primary relief, and then sort of, I guess, the secondary relief. Now, some people like to do this in facets. Instead of like rolling the drill up against the grinding wheel, you'd sort of grind the first, sort of a second grind, and then the third grind would just sort of take off the highest of the back edge, the back of the heel. So it would look more like a prismatic grind where you'd have 3 angles creating the full clearance around the wrap of the cutting edge. Now, what we've done here is basically the same thing you would do to sharpen a chisel. We've got the primary and secondary bevel providing clearance for the cutting edge. The only really tricky part is that this is sort of round or conical, and so you've got to be a little bit lighter on your feet up at the grinding wheel, while you're moving the material around, trying to get the geometry that you want. Let's go give this a try as is. This is a piece of hardwood. I mean, it's not hardwood, like scientifically. I don't know if it is. It's not pine. I'm not exactly sure what to expect here. I haven't tried this, but theoretically it should drill a nice clean hole. So I'm no expert here, but I don't know. Those chips don't look too unreasonable. There's a lot of sawdust. I don't know if that's the drill or my speeds weren't right. That feed did seem a little bit slow. Let's try it in a piece of aluminum. Well, that didn't work. So that there is why you don't make drill bits out of mild steel. But now I'm curious. We said earlier that the point of the drill, sort of the web thickness, can't actually do any cutting because there aren't cutting edges there. I wonder if we were to try this with a pilot hole bigger than that smooshed area, if it might not have better luck. Certainly made a drill bit looking chip, but maybe you can see the aluminum is sort of bonded to the cutting edge there and you heard it slow down. So this seems like a good time to talk about web thinning, or splitting the point, as in split point drills. They're sort of similar, but they're different. Let's have a look at this 1.5 inch drill. This is somewhat of an extreme example, but it's easier to see. Now, I wouldn't usually split the point or thin the web on a drill this big, because I wouldn't use it without a pre-drilled pilot hole. Let me explain. By the way, this is usually how I sharpen drills. This is more typical of the kind of grinding that I do personally. It's more of a sort of a long, continuous grind. I'll set up the angle, make sure the point is in the center, balanced, and then just sort of blend out the relief in the back. The web on this particular drill is a little over 200 thousandths. That's a smidge over 5 millimeters. The point on the end of this web, as sharpened, is called a chisel point. Now, we said that part doesn't do any cutting. The center really just kind of pushes material out of the way until it's picked up and cut by, well, the next part of the drill that would actually do any cutting. If you think about just what the web is trying to do while this drill is spinning, it'd be like trying to make a hole with an equivalent sized drill, only maybe imagine it spinning backwards so it couldn't really cut. It would try to bulldoze material out from underneath it. To make big holes like this, you'd pre-drill the work first. In this case, with a drill maybe 1 or 1.5 times the size of the web. That way, when you go in with this drill, the web isn't pushing against anything. Alternatively, since it's the thickness of this web that is causing high drilling forces, the other way to get those forces down is to make the web thinner at the tip. Basically do some local grinding in those areas, effectively making the chisel tip a smaller size. A thinner chisel point will have an easier time getting into the material you're trying to drill. Now, usually you'd do this on the edge of your grinding wheel. On smaller drills, you could use, say, a Dremel tool. Now, this here is a split point drill. Now, split points don't always look the same. Every brand sort of has their own take on it. It might be a mix of split pointing and web thinning. But take a look at how they've done it here. The primary bevel is ground a bit steep and long. The second bevel, or secondary relief grind, is also pretty steep. It clips the heel off the primary grind and also splits the point. They ground pretty much to where the center of the drill is, to where the center of the chisel tip was, splitting it in two. This drill doesn't have much trouble at all cutting through mild steel. And that point geometry also does a great job of keeping it on center or in a center punch mark. Okay, so I was going to sharpen this drill that we saw earlier in the video. the one with the chipped off corners. This actually has enough damage where it needs quite a bit of reconstruction. I'd probably grind the end off and then start from scratch. That is a little more challenging than just sharpening a dull drill bit. I mean, the steps are exactly the same, but if you're just learning how to do this, don't make it too hard on yourself from the get-go. So I dug through an old box of drills. I've probably got 20 pounds of old drills, and I found this thing. This is a 7/16, about 11 millimeter. The tip's been kind of burnt up. The angles are all goofy. The thing is even quite magnetic. I wish I could tell you I bought this at some kind of flea market, but I'm pretty sure this damage is all my fault. It's got almost no clearance in the back. The angles don't look right. The two lips of the drill are different sizes. I'm kind of embarrassed, to be honest. But I think it might look closer to a dull drill bit you might try to sharpen at home. So this might be, an easier place to start. The other thing you'll want to have is a drill gauge. A drill gauge is really nothing more than a broken protractor, like it's stuck on 59 degrees. You'd use one of these to set your drill point angle for a 118 degree bit, and you'd use the little graduations on the scale to make sure both flutes are the same length. Both cutting edges are equal. That means your point is on center. Now, in reality, 118 isn't really written in stone. It just happens to be the drill point angle that works, reasonably well on most materials, like an all-purpose one-size-fits-all. If you do more work with harder or softer materials, plastic or aluminum or brass, that kind of stuff, you may want to look into drill point angles and just sharpen all your drills to the appropriate angle. They'll perform a lot better in the majority of the work that you might do. Now, to use one of these, you just simply put the drill up against the gauge and you kind of sight in at the top there. Hopefully you can see that. The angle is pretty close, but the two cutting edges are different lengths. That looks like it's almost at the 32 mark. That's the wrong angle, and it's a little bit longer. Now, drill gauges are pretty inexpensive. But if you don't have one, of course you could use a protractor and a scale to do the same thing. Use the protractor to keep track of your drill point angle and use your scale to make sure the cutting edges are the same length. If you don't have a protractor, I have seen people use a pair of hex nuts. That included angle there is 120 degrees, but like I said earlier, it's close enough. And if you don't have a drill, well, I can't help you there. In my case, the first thing I want to take care of is this magnetism. There's nothing worse than trying to sharpen or even use a drill bit that kind of accumulates fuzzies on the end. You could use one of these things, magnetizer or demagnetizer. You can get them pretty much anywhere. I don't even know how much they cost. More than what they're worth, for sure. All about maybe they're really good for is small screwdrivers. Though I guess technically in this case this drill would fit in one of those openings. What I have and what I prefer to use though is a proper demagnetizer. This is a little bit small, but for what I do, it's priceless. I bought this soon after I got the surface grinder, as any parts you take off the surface grinder are highly magnetic, which again gets annoying very quickly. Okay, that should be a lot less hassle to deal with. Off to the bench grinder. Now, if you like, you could mark a line with like a Sharpie marker across the rest on your grinder, just to help you keep track of the point angle. But I'm just going to start grinding and keep track with the drill gauge. Anyway, as we noted on the bench, one cutting edge is longer than the other, and it's at the wrong angle. The other one is pretty close, but it's a little bit short. I'm going to keep the drill parallel to the ground. Again, the round grinding wheel is going to add that, 5 or 7 or 8 degree clearance on the backside. And I'll just keep alternating sides until it comes in according to my drill gauge. I'll dunk every now and again to keep it from getting too hot. Now hopefully you can see this. Both the cutting edges are the same length and at the same angle. That means the included angle is correct and the point is on center. The other thing to note, maybe I can show you here, the cutting edges are parallel to each other. Now that's how they'll just come out in the wash if you're just freshening up a dull drill. If you're doing complete facial reconstruction, you'll want to keep an eye on that. The other thing we haven't talked about is the chisel point angle. You see the angle that connects sort of the two flutes across the center? That should be at about 120 degrees. I don't know how much that is, but it looks about right. Now I'm going to relieve the back of those grinds. Again, cut this material off here. I'm going to blue Sharpie these just so we can keep track how far that grind goes up that primary bevel. And just like we did earlier, I ground that secondary relief or secondary clearance up until sort of the opposing cutting edge, trying to keep everything as parallel as possible. In fact, if I look close, I think I can even see some wear on my grinding wheel because the grinds are a little bit bowed. So although not strictly necessary in my case, I'm going to be using this mostly in machine tools, in the lathe and in the mill. Let's try to split this point, just for the sheer thrill of being alive. Alright, I lose. That looks a lot more like web thinning, maybe, than split pointing. You can see the chisel point is still sort of continuous across the top. I bet that thing looks absolutely huge in the camera compared to what I'm looking at. But anyway, there's not really like a single point there to catch like a center punch. I don't know, let's give it a try. This might have been one of those should have stopped while I was ahead moments. It's a piece of cold rolled steel. Let's see how this thing does. I'll try it here first. I want to see what the chips look like under a constant feed rate. And if the cutting edges hold up, we'll try it in the hand drill and see how it feels there. Well, it certainly drilled a hole. Cutting edges are still intact. Let's try it with a pilot hole. Okay, so I intentionally let that run at a constant feed rate into the material. That's why you saw it get all bird's nesty. Usually you'd bump the handle or ease up on the quill to break these chips. But this is more what I was looking for. Both flutes are creating this pretty much the same identical chip. So the initial grinds were good, but my split pointing sucks. Consequently, this was running at 600 RPM and a little over 2 inches per minute. 50 millimeters per minute feed rate. Let's try it in the hand drill. Alright, this is a piece of mild steel, just some hot rolled. It's, I don't know, 1/4 inch thick, 6 millimeters. I'm going to use the same pre-drill, because I don't feel like pushing a 1/2 inch bit through this hot rolled steel. And here's our 7/16 bit, same bit. The cutting edges are still there, so it's a good first sign. Let's see how it feels. Alright, so I mean, it's a 1/2 inch hole. Sucks to drill by hand, but other than that split point, I'm happy with how that cuts. So just one last thing I wanted to mention. What we've just kind of walked through, for better or for worse, applies to really any kind of drill bit or cutting tool. Hopefully you see the parallels between what we did on the drill and what we did back in the lathe tool sharpening video. Again, if you've never done it before, just look at another equivalent drill and try to copy that geometry onto your dull one. Each drill will have slightly different geometry based on the job it's intended to do. As a last example, let's take a look at a masonry bit. Looks very similar to our bit for drilling metal, but the actual sharpening geometry is a little simpler. I mean, it still has flutes. They don't do as much as the other bit do. They're really just there to move away the material that the tip of the tool, the carbide insert in this case, is breaking away. And it's really only got that primary bevel on both cutting flutes. And the secondary is that's just support material in the steel shank that's brazed to the cutting tip. Certainly if you grind this back far enough where you're running into that, you'll need to clearance that too. Now to sharpen one of these, it's really just a matter of hitting the two primary cutting edges. I mean, you'd want to do this with like a diamond wheel on your grinder or a greenstone meant for carbide. You'll go crazy trying to do it with a hand file. But if you have masonry bits and you've never sharpened them, give it a try and I'm sure you'll see it makes quite a difference. I don't know how my 10-minute videos always end up turning into half an hour. As always, hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I guess I'll see you in Go-Kart Part 2.